Revitalize, revitalize. Put your hands up.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Mosaic Station, and we're happy to feature a short series this month for Native American Heritage Month, where we are spotlighting various Native faculty members at San Jose State. Joining us today is Alisha Ragland, who is a lecturer here at San Jose State, amongst many roles that she plays. We're going to be able to talk for a little bit about your experiences, your interests, and various other things, and we'll see where we go. So if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks. My name is Alisha Marie Ragland. I am the tribal liaison for AB 275 here, and as well as a part-time lecturer. So AB 275 is a repatriation law that was recently passed, and it amends the California Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. So it places the onus on institutions to begin the process of repatriation rather than making it tribes' responsibilities to, contact the institutions that are housing their ancestors and request them back. So this is a law that was written by James Ramos. He's an Indigenous member of the California Senate, and he passed this law with the intention of repatriation, which I think is important. And so we're looking forward to full repatriation within the next couple of years for San Jose State and all the CSUs.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll definitely, if you're up for it, we'll talk a little bit about your work as the tribal liaison on campus. But first, I would love to hear a little bit more about your background, a little bit about, how you got into this work.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So I have a matrilineal Chumash heritage, and I'm third generation Sicilian on my dad's side, as well as my mother's paternal side. So as far as we know, our Chumash heritage is through women all the way down the line as far as our genealogy has shown us, which I think is really cool.
That's awesome. Just for people who may not be familiar, is there a kind of a geographical sense you can give folks about where Chumash land would be?
Yeah, so Chumash territory is all of the areas from Santa Barbara all the way down to Los Angeles, and it borders on the south, the Tongva territory. It also encompasses the Channel Islands, and that is where my family's oldest DNA line actually comes from a woman, again, on the island of Limu, or so-called Santa Cruz Island in the Channel Islands.
That's awesome. It's really fantastic that you have the line that you can trace through. I know that a lot of people don't necessarily have the family history that they can kind of point to and learn more about and research more about. So that's awesome.
Yeah, it's important for me to say too that I'm what is sometimes referred to as a reconnecting Native. So I didn't grow up with the Chumash community. The only community that I grew up with was other people who are in my family and our extended family. And so some years after my grandmother passed away, and this is true for a lot of my Native friends that I've spoken with, is that we often reconnect to our Native side as a way to connect with someone in our life who has passed on, and to maintain a connection with them through our shared identity that we inherited from that person. And that's definitely the case for my family. And pretty serendipitously, we got into contact with some long lost relative who was also doing their own reconnecting. And they were able to share that information that I just shared with you about our DNA coming from the so-called Santa Cruz Island. And she was able to share with us the genealogy work that she got done right around the same time that we were doing that same work as well. So we were able to connect with family that we would have otherwise maybe never encountered if we hadn't come back into this reconnecting aspect of our lives. So that was really special when we met her.
Yeah, that sounds amazing, actually, to be able to have that connection. I think that family connection is so important, and being able to kind of establish or reestablish these connections is so important.
Yeah.
So you talked a little bit about the work that you do. I think we probably have a few students who don't quite understand um, just the value of what repatriation is or means. If you could talk a little bit about the value of repatriation, and what it means for particularly for those who identify within the tribes that are being honored by the act of repatriation.
Yeah, so it's a kind of work that should not ever be a job. Like, this shouldn't have ever happened in the first place. I don't know any other group of folks who have to fight for their ancestors to remain at rest in the ground. This is something that, as far as I know, is specific to Native groups. And it's almost mind-boggling that we have to make the case for why our ancestors shouldn't be disturbed in their death, in their afterlife. But it is of supreme importance to any tribe, all tribes. Not that I can speak on behalf of anyone else, but I know that this is, it's in the forefront of everybody's minds. Not only is it spiritually and, for any sort of cultural cosmology, it's really important for spiritual purposes, but it's also just a reminder of how entrenched colonialism still is, and how we are still undergoing this process of reclaiming everything that was taken from us, including our people. And in some cases, specifically in the Bay Area, so not my ancestry, but we're talking about cemeteries that were threatened in the 60s, that living people had ancestors just a few generations removed. So it's not necessarily something that happened hundreds of years ago, or it's very recent in some cases. Those aren't the collections that San Jose State houses, but it's just a kind of an overview of the fight to bring the ancestors back home, and how they're not always so far removed through space or through time. Sometimes it's actually recent. And so this is it's a deeply painful thing to hold every day. And absolutely being in the facility where the ancestors are being stored, it's a very uncomfortable space. And I knew that going into this work, I knew that. And so there's things that I try to weave into, my practice to keep myself safe, and, to allow myself to process that stuff. And I'm really grateful for my colleagues in the anthropology department, specifically the ones that I work with for this NAGPRA project, which is Dr. Charlotte Sinceri and Dr. Roberto Gonzalez. They're very supportive. I feel like anything that I need, I can ask them for it, and they would do their best to support me. But bringing the ancestors home is number one on any tribe that we consult with. We're fortunate that so far in our consultations, we have a lot of support for repatriation, obviously, and we're going to do everything in our power to help them get the ancestors where they want to go, and to put them in the ground at rest for good on protected land, so that this will never happen again.
It's a heavy role that you play. I think it's really a lot of burden that you're shouldering, through this. So I think it's really fantastic that you have such a empathetic and caring viewpoint. It can be so simple to try to reduce this to just a spreadsheet or something. And I mean, part of the harm, was initially not treating remains as people, and it would be so easy to not treat these remains as people, even now.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about what being the tribal liaison actually means?
Sure, yeah. So I am accountable to all of the tribes with lineal descent or cultural affiliation to the ancestors in our care. And so my job is to schedule with them, organize with them, and engage in consultation with them. And what consultation means is whatever the tribes want it to mean. So if we meet in person, if I show them the facility, we get their feedback on how to store, how to continue storing the ancestors, how to inventory them. So once we have our initial consultations, we conduct an inventory, which is similar to the federal NAGPRA process of repatriation. And once the inventory is published, typically tribes will be able to apply for legal transfer. So that's the act of receiving the ancestors back, the act of repatriation. And because AB 275 is trying to fast track and guarantee the process of repatriation, we're already engaged in discussions on which tribes are interested in receiving legal transfer. And there's all these terms like legal transfer, right? Which it's just uncomfortable to use them because, like you said, it's not possible for me to reduce these people to just numbers on a spreadsheet, even though that's something that will have to be done. And the whole thing about it is kind of icky in that way, but at the same time, I do have a background in tribal archaeology. And so I have done burial recovery before, and it was the same thing in that situation. It was like, why are we doing this? Why are we forced to do this? Why do we have to do? Can you build your museum somewhere else, or can you build your subdivision somewhere else? But of course, in California, our people were so successful. Anywhere you throw a excavator, you're going to find evidence of how successful our cultures have been. This is a paradise, to be able to live here. And before it was developed, it was even more so, right? So anywhere that you dig a hole, you're bound to find some evidence. But part of what being a tribal archaeologist or working in being an Indigenous archaeologist, working in burial recovery or in this type of repatriation work, although it's deeply painful, it's almost like we're continuing to care for them. It's that a horrible thing has happened and we can't go back in time, but how can we alleviate some of the suffering now? And how can we provide a safe transfer back home, And so I lean into that side of it more than the devastation of what has happened. It's like, okay, how can I make sure that they will be safe and they will be respected while they're in our care? And there have been challenges, and like I said, the faculty in the department, Dr. Senseri and Dr. Roberto Gonzalez, have both been really supportive.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. You also mentioned you're a part-time lecturer. What do you teach here at San Jose State?
Oh, so yeah, I lecture in the Anthropology department and I teach Intro to Archaeology.
That's awesome. So we probably have students who are interested in possibly taking your course. So hopefully that continues as well. So I would love to get into a little bit more about your journey into this work. Obviously we're a college campus. Love to hear a little bit about your journey through college, through academia, and how you got to be where you are now.
Sure. I love talking about school. I'm a huge nerd for school, obviously, which is funny because all throughout elementary and high school, I was a terrible student. You know, I didn't think that I was book smart at all. And so I struggled with attendance and behavioral issues, everything. You know, I went around from this school to this district to, you know, what is it called? Continuation schools and everything, until I finally graduated and went to community college. I attended the local college here where I live in Monterey, Monterey Peninsula College. And I took ethnic studies, women's studies, and cultural anthropology. And I wasn't sure which avenue I was going to take for my major. And Professor Elias Carey at Monterey Peninsula College he teaches anthropology in a way that has the feminist perspective, and he's just generally a really bright and compassionate guy. And so the way that he taught cultural anthropology was through a feminist and, you know, sort of a ethnic studies lens. And I really saw that anthropology could be a melding of all of those, right? It's like, it's everything that I wanted to know about the world, including the nasty bits, right? Including the terrible things. And how do we hold space for the terrible things that, you know, that has happened while looking towards the future and working with communities for solutions. So there was already an applied anthropological kind of framework to his classes. And I pretty much decided that first class that that's what I wanted to do, and specifically to an applied anthropological program. And I had so much fun in my community college, you know, connecting with other people who were interested in being there and engaging in discussions and learning about kind of the collective human experience. I decided to pursue my my education and get a master's degree so that I could teach at the community college level, because I came into myself, you know, I felt in community college. And so it took a long time. I come from a working class background, you know, so I've never had a lot of money. I had to work all the way through community college. So I had to do part-time school, full-time work. And by the time I got to San Jose State, I transferred. So it was halfway through my BA program. And I learned that San Jose State had an applied anthropology graduate program. And so it fit in perfectly with what I wanted to do. And I had a lot of fun, again, going through the undergraduate program at San Jose State. A lot of the anthropology teachers are still here, and most of them are really awesome people. And they're not just, you know, passionate about what they do. They really go out of their way to make students feel welcome and supported. And so I appreciate those folks that now I get to call my colleagues. And then in grad school, in the applied anthropology program, it was really tough. It's a very challenging program, but I really got my footing as far as my career path went. And it, you know, I want to put it out there that because of my background, having to work like service industry jobs and restaurants, cafes, and stuff throughout college, I didn't really have any experience in the field of anthropology when I got to grad school. But a lot of my peers did. So they were already working in the field and they came back to school to kind of get you know, an advanced degree to kind of bolster their career. And so there was a little bit of insecurity in the beginning, right? And I do want to, as a first gen college graduate, I do want to put that out there for any other first gens that are listening. Yeah, just stick with it, because you know, I was there for a reason, and the reason was because I was passionate and I wanted to serve the community in any way that I could. And I was able to connect with Alan Leventhal. He's a emeritus lecturer at San Jose State in the anthropology department, And he's also the Muwekma Ohlone tribe's tribal archaeologist and ethnohistorian. And so we were engaged in a community project with the New Museum of Los Gatos, and they were collecting life histories for all of the Native American folks that live in Santa Clara County, but who took advantage of the federal relocation program and wound up in Santa Clara as a result of the relocation program. And so the relocation, the federal relocation program was seeking to get tribal folks off of reservations and kind of assimilated into urban centers and urban American culture. And, you know, kind of counter to what we believe the desired outcome from the federal government is that when relocated tribes came into these indigenous centers, what we find is that they seek each other out. And it's not just folks from their culture or from their reservation. It's what happened was there was this kind of coalescence of pan-Indian identity. And it happened in a really beautiful time in the 60s. Well, it happened throughout. I mean, I think the last relocatee was like in the 80s or something very recent, really surprising. But yeah, it's a really beautiful story. There's a YouTube video about it too, so maybe you can share the link to that. So in volunteering for that museum exhibit, the New Museum of Los Gatos also provided a separate exhibit for the Muwekma Ohlone to honor the indigenous people, you know, whose land we are on, and whose land the museum was on. So they didn't want to leave out the Muwekma from the greater exhibit. And so there's an exhibit on the Muwekma that I did with tribal chairwoman, vice chairwoman, Monica Ariano. So when I was working with them on that exhibit, they needed extra help. One thing that's really wonderful about the Muwekma story is that they do their own archaeological recovery. So anytime ancestors are found in a project, they request to be in charge of the burial excavation. And so it's really tricky work, obviously, because of the reverence that we have for ancestors. There's also a reluctance, right, to disturb them any further. And even though, you know, someone has to care for them and take them out of harm's way, a lot of people don't like to do that work. And so if there's not enough tribal enrolled members, then they'll ask, you know, their helpers. And so luckily, through Alan and other folks in the anthropology department, we've created this beneficial relationship with the Muwekma Ohlone tribe. And so I was already working with the vice chairwoman, Monica Ariano, on our exhibit. They asked me to be a tribal archaeologist for a specific project in Sinol, which is in the Alameda County. And that's where everything kind of struck me really hard about, you know, being face to face with ancestors. And it was really challenging. I was like trying to hide my emotions in the field because, again, it's work that should never be done. It's, you know, it shouldn't have to be done. And so somebody has to do it. And it's such a huge responsibility and kind of an honor to be able to be in that, what I refer to as like a caretaking role, right, for the ancestors. And so rather than focusing on how awful it is, you focus on the gratitude, you know, to be able to show the ancestors that you're caring for them and you're looking out for them even after they pass on. So that's how I came into this work. I had the really unique experience of working for a tribe as an archaeologist. And that's, you know, that's how I learned that it should not be separate from descendant communities. We should never conduct our work separately from the descendant communities. And they should always be in charge of the research. They should always be in charge of the distribution of whatever knowledge is produced as a result of archaeological research, because anything short of that is just another form of colonization, and that's against what I'm here for. So
Yeah,
that's how I found my way.
That's fantastic. I love that story. I think you know, there are all these bits and pieces in there about, you know, getting hooked on the learning aspect and being drawn into, you know, associating it with your worldviews and trying to figure out the world. I think a big part of college experiences is for folks to just try to figure out how the world works. And yeah, I completely agree with you. I think that kind of community care is so important, and it's so easy particularly in an academic setting, to be stuck in this trap where you just think, well, you know, knowledge is a finite concrete thing, and it just comes from the top, right? We're these empty vessels, and teachers just fill our brains with things. But in actuality, that's not really how it should work, right? It's community developed. You know, people all come in as knowers, people all come in as thought leaders, and it's really just engaging in that conversation and building, you know, collective knowledge up from the bottom up. So, you know, that's awesome. I love kind of that process that you were talking about.
Yeah.
So I would love to talk a little bit about your identities as, you know, coming from a multiple race background, and then also, you know, being Native or Indigenous identified, and how like your cultural journey was for you and how you came to understand that for yourself.
Yeah, so I think that being from the working class, first of all, being a first gen college graduate, I think that had more of an impact in my journey than having a mixed settler and Indigenous California ancestry. I think that a lot of people who know that they have third or fourth generation folks in California, I'm curious actually to know how many people have mixed ancestry, because I see this as another aspect of colonization, is to kind of obfuscate our past and you know, eliminate any remnants of indigeneity from our lives. And the more that folks can reclaim that identity, but not stepping on, you know, as a reconnecting Native, it's important for me to say that, like, you know, you don't thrust yourself into the forefront of Native communities. But I see my role more of as a supportive role. If I can share my story with other folks who may be reconnecting, who may be coming into their indigeneity after leaving the community for whatever reason, or for people who aren't enrolled in their tribes for a myriad of reasons, you know, if there's something that I can do to help inspire or empower people to reclaim their indigeneity, then I'll be doing my job here, and also in support of folks who have always been in the culture and who have had their identities kind of pushed to the forefront of their experiences throughout college or, you know, outside of school too. But I think it's the same as any minority status, really, is like hearing other people talk about you and your identity, you know, as experts, and then seeing students receive the information in ways that maybe you don't appreciate, right? So like, one of the things for Native folks is that we often get lumped into just one monolithic catalog or one culture, you know, and as we know, I mean, there's more than 500 tribes in California alone, right? So, I mean, just think about that in terms of the nation, and then, you know, the Americas includes, you know, right, North America, Canada, South America as well. So there is not just one Native identity. So, you know, the fact that some folks live on reservations today without clean water, access to running water, you know, that's a reality for Native folks. It's not a reality for all Native folks. And so, you know, we shouldn't take space up when we're talking about you know, all Native experiences. So I don't have that experience at all. You know, when in my community here, we live on Rumsen Ohlone land that's currently stewarded by the Ohlone, Costanoan, and Esalen Nation and the Esalen tribe of Monterey County. So a lot of folks have mixed Chumash identity in this area and mixed Ohlone, Southern Ohlone, Costanoan, and Rumsen Ohlone, Esalen identity. And one thing that continues to amaze and inspire me is how we all, a lot of us, not all of us, a lot of us share ancestry. And we have, you know, so-and-so's last name on this side of our, you know, ancestry tree, or we have so-and-so's uncle who married our great-great-great aunt. And like one of my more prominent ancestors is affectionately referred to as Mamita. She, her name is Mary Soto Marquez Dixon. And I'm sorry, Mary Dixon Marquez Soto. And she's estimated to have over 200 ancestors in this area. So that's one of our experiences is going to Safeway and my mom being like, oh, Alisha, this is my cousin. She's a descendant of Mamita or something like that. And, you know, learning that even though we grew up in mostly a Italian-American family, knowing that we have like tamale recipes and enchilada recipes and thinking like, where does that come from? Oh, well, the Spaniards settled here, completely disrupted life for Native American folks. But Mamita, she sold tamales at the Carmel Mission. So that's why we have tamale recipe, and that's why some of my elders speak Spanish, you know, even though they're not necessarily Spanish, they're indigenous.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think kind of that tracing that legacy of colonization imperialism is so interesting. And particularly, you know, I'm a big fan of like tracing food and, you know, where food comes from and seeing all that, because food's such an important connection for everybody. But that, you know, that's amazing, you know, and I think, you know, it's something that I think a lot of folks can relate to, you know, particularly folks from historically marginalized communities, you know, having that fractured family feel, you know, and being like, well, you know, I'm aware of the people I grew up with, but also like, you know, I have second cousins or third uncles or whatever out there. And, you know, you have this general feeling of like family and everybody's an auntie and everybody's an uncle, you know, and so the kind of embracing of family and community kind of all at once is such a wonderful feeling.
Totally.
So you mentioned, you know, that you went through a process of kind of reconnecting with your identities and kind of in honor of your grandmother, you know, getting to know your family line a little bit more. You know, for folks who may not have gotten to that point in their cultural journey yet, can you talk a little bit about like the strengths, the values, like the importance of perhaps trying to approach that work? You know, what did that give you as a person to kind of go through that process?
For me, it was really a compulsion. I felt compelled to know these things, and it felt like traveling through time. It felt like, you know, traveling through the past. Someone actually wrote a book about Mamita, our ancestor, and she was kind of like a local. Everybody knew her. Everybody knew her in the area that is now Carmel. I was probably called Carmel back then too, but it was completely unrecognizable. Now Carmel is a very white, very affluent, you know, kind of.
Didn't they have Clint Eastwood as a mayor or something like that?
Oh, yeah,
Is that
yeah, that's exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is now. And, you know, people come from all over to go shopping there and to play golf and whatnot. But back then, in Mamita's time, it was kind of ghettoized. And I mean that in in the definition of the term. It was to exclude any non-white people from Monterey. And so this includes, at the time, any undesired European immigrants. So Southern Europeans at the time, like Italians, were not considered white until the 1940s or something on the census that it changed. And this is a long legacy of racism and allowing people who fit whatever the definition of whiteness is at the time, right? Maybe that will be for another podcast, but it's interesting because it's a huge fishing community. We're right next to the wharf here. And so in this attempt to have a white society, I suppose, in Monterey, it was not safe for people who were not considered white at the time to stay overnight. And so they would make this trek up the Carmel Hill from Monterey after a long day fishing, I suppose. And Mamita's house was a known resting point. She was kind of a working class hero in a way. She was known to have coffee and tortillas ready for people. So there's the Spanish influence again, right? Why does a Native person have tortillas being served? Well, that's the legacy of colonization, round one, right? Because it was just Spaniards and then Mexico, and then the gold rush happened and California became a state. And so yeah, she's also probably the inspiration for Steinbecks' book, Tortilla Flats, although he never credited her, which may be part of the reason why my grandmother always talked a lot of mess about Steinbeck. She never said why, but she, called him a drunk and this and that. Okay. So not very nice, but yeah, if he took his inspiration from our ancestor, we would like some recognition for that. But
yeah, absolutely.
But her legacy stands on its own. I mean, like I said, she has hundreds of descendants running around here, and we connect every now and then, and we honor her. We go to her gravesite, and there's always abalone and shell and flowers there. So I know that that we're still honoring her memory. But yeah, she was kind of a force to be reckoned with in this area. And we see that through that ghettoization of Carmel at the time, you have you have people from Mexico, you have obviously indigenous folks. She would often go dance with the Esalen community in this area. And so there's kind of this multiracial coming together in this area. And I think that's why so many of us have mixed Chumash and Esalen and Italian ancestry. And I would love to reconnect more with folks in this area about that, other than the people that I know because we're related.
Right.
But I think that's really interesting.
That's awesome. Is that book available for commercial purchase? The one?
I think so. Yeah, it's called Mamita's House.
Okay.
Yeah, it's really short. It's a really simple book. Let's see. I would like to share the Santa Cruz Archaeological Society's little write-up that they had on Mamita's House, A True Tale of Tortilla Flat. You can buy it on the website that shall not be named.
We'll find some good links. Maybe we'll direct people a little bit away from that place, but yeah. We'll have it. We'll have some links so people can check it out.
Okay, good.
That's awesome. That's fantastic. I think it's such an interesting family history story, and to have all of those ties, particularly with the land itself too, and be able to have those landmarks, and say that your family then is as big as it is so intrinsically tied to the land itself.
Yeah, and that's something that I didn't get to in your question, is that we're not sure at what point our family migrated from the Chumash homeland to Monterey County. That's another thing about reconnecting, is that it's, well, just like culture in general. I mean, it's never static. You never get to the end point. Okay, this is it. This is the end of our, identity. No, it's always changing and it's always fluid. And the same thing is true with culture. It's always changing. It's never stagnant. But yeah, the work for reconnecting is never done. You'll always learn something new. You'll always meet a new relative. You'll always talk to a new elder and learn a million things that would never have occurred to you, and so
Yeah,
it's really special work.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's awesome. It's and part of that, like, kind of reaching for your kind of collective cultural knowledge and holding on to it and being able to teach that to the next generation too. I think, these are the lessons that we learn through culture. And we learn them from our ancestors. We teach them to our descendants, and that's how we survive.
Absolutely.
So the last thing I would love to talk a little bit about is, if we do have students listening to this, if we do have Native students in particular listening to this, Native or Indigenous students listening to this, what's some advice that you might give in terms of students maybe finding success or representation, or just finding themselves a little bit?
Well, what's already helped me tremendously is reconnecting with or connecting with other Native folks on campus. So I found the gathering of academic Native and Indigenous faculty, the Faculty Affinity Group for Native American folks on campus, which has already been a huge support. And it's just nice to be around people who get it and who get you. And, so I would say, seek out folks in the Pan-Indigenous community and, know that there are other people who need that community and need that connection just as much as you do. And don't expect to find it everywhere. That's a reality. If it doesn't exist, then you have to make it, and you don't have to do it alone. However, find your helpers. As far as success, it's so unique to each person. I was never really concerned with making a lot of money, which is convenient because I went into anthropology. So I knew that I wasn't going to be good at school unless it was something that I was really passionate about. And what I'm passionate about is people and community and, justice and restoration work. And I just, I loved school. I loved learning. I loved discussing ideas, and especially with a justice framework. So I knew that whatever path it would take me on, it would be something that I cared about, and that would be the definition of success for me, is that whatever I was doing would be meaningful to me and fulfilling in some way, so that I could give something back to the community. And teaching is definitely that for me. But also having these connection points into Indigenous communities. And even if it's not my own, I live here, and I work with tribes here, and I work with tribes where I am employed in San Jose, and being accountable to them and working in the service of their ancestors is a huge honor. And I'm grateful to all of our tribal consultants that keep me accountable and allow me the opportunity to serve them better. And so, yeah, success has to come from what you draw fulfillment from, and what really speaks to your soul. And if making a lot of money is important to you, then make sure that you go into something that that will pay you for it. But really identify what keeps you going, what motivates you every day, and don't study something just for the sake of having those letters at the end of your name. Like, study it because it's in you, and you want to develop it even more.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that makes a lot of sense. I'm hearing that, it's important to find community. It's important to form those bonds, and it's important to find passion in your work. And it's okay if what's driving you is financial success. That's a big
Mhm.
part of living in a capitalistic society. But
Absolutely.
making sure that whatever that is going to be is still about your passions, about
Right.
what drives you. So yeah.
Mhm.
Well, that's yeah, fantastic. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing some time today,
Oh, my
sharing
pleasure.
part of your story. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Um, and hopefully, do you have ways in which students can connect with you?
Yeah,
Um,
I'm on the faculty website for San Jose State Anthro Department.
mhm.
They can certainly reach out to me through email on that page. And they can leave messages on my office phone or whatever. And I'd be more than happy to meet with students for any reason at all. So yeah, don't be
Okay.
shy.
Yeah, fantastic. And we'll have links down for those as well. So yeah, thank you so much for joining me today, Alicia. I really appreciate it.
Anytime. Thank you so much, Chris. It was my pleasure.
Don't call it lost culture, call it revitalization. Language is our seed, and we're growing through the pavement. Syllabics the roots, dialect is our leaves. Flower is our power, and community our tree. We've come too damn far for us to ever give up. Now it's time to elevate each other, truly rise up. The only real battle is the battle within. Once you believe in yourself, then your journey will begin. My mother is sacred, she's a survivor for real. Though it's taken her and I so many decades to heal, still we persevere cause we got dreams to fulfill. Like my sis Eekwol said, success is a good kill. I be killing it and doing this amongst my sisters. Heal beside our men and truly educate the youngsters. They rely on us and so we gotta stay tough. So make your offering with unconditional love.